So today I'm going to be restringing my Solarguitars V1.6BD Artist LTD. I think that's all the letters. I've had this guitar for a couple years now, and I really like it a lot. If you've watched my channel, you know that I have a couple of USA Jacksons, and those guitars were always my favorite guitars. Still are, still love those guitars. But when I bought this, I was just curious about the brand. And so I bought a guitar, and I saw they were taking on artists, so I became a Solarguitars artist. And I've bought a couple of bass guitars since. Obviously I've had those on my channel too. They don't send me anything free, they just give me a bit of a discount, which is cool. And yeah, I love this guitar. It's a very solid guitar, sounds great. I did change out the pickups and put EMGs in it because I've just been playing EMGs forever. That's what I'm used to, it's what I like. So, and the stock pickups sounded good, but just weren't quite getting me where I wanted to be. And with the EMG at 24 volts in this guitar, sounds great. So, yeah, I didn't think I'd ever put down my USA Jacksons for an import guitar made in Indonesia. At least I think that's where it's made. Yeah, but with the Evertune, I absolutely love the Evertune. You know, the USA Jacksons come with Floyd Rose. I'm not a Floyd Rose guy, so this guitar is great. You know, I just think it looks great, it sounds great, and it plays great. And just like the last video, I'm throwing on SIT 10 through 52. Forgot there for a second. And I'm going to tell a couple of old stories. Back in, I think it was either 99 or 2000. We went to New York City, to Queens, to play at a club that is no longer there called Castle Heights. That club was very well known for having a lot of underground death metal shows. And the guys from Dehumanized, I think specifically George Torres, the drummer, hooked us up with a show there to play with them. And we had done a handful of shows out there, and we had played there with Dehumanized a couple of times, so some of this gets a little blurred in my brain. I can't remember exactly who we played with. I know it was Dehumanized, I'm pretty sure it was Devourment, and I know we played with Dying Fetus and Skinless there at one point, but I don't know if it was the same show or not. But anyway, I think we had to work that day. You know, it was probably a Friday, we had to work, and so we were gonna drive out after work and stay with George. And so we took off sometime in the evening, and you know, this was before GPS and cell phones and all that stuff. So, you know, you got your road atlas, which was a book about this tall and about this wide that had all the streets and highways, and Jeff, our bass player, was pretty good at navigating using that. I always hated it, but he was pretty good at it, seemed to like it, and we always ended up getting to where we were going. So, but anyway, so we get pretty much all the way there, and we're about to go into New York City, and we just don't, we're on the highway, like an interchange type thing, and we just are not sure where to go. And so we notice a cop parked off in the shoulder, and we thought, well, what if we just pull up and ask him? And you know, back then we were a little younger and probably not as smart, and probably had some beers in the vehicle because that's kind of how we traveled back then. But we did end up pulling up to the police officer, the nice police officer, and we explained, hey, you know, we're from out of town, this is where we're going, we don't know where to go. And he starts explaining it to us, and I think he could just tell by the looks on our faces that we had absolutely no idea what he was talking about. So at one point he's just like, well, just follow me. He goes, I'll point when you need to get off. And we're like, okay. So we're like, wow, this cop's just gonna show us where to go. So he flips on his lights and he pulls out in front of us, and we immediately start laughing. We're like, oh my God, we're getting a police escort into New York. And so yeah, he's ahead of us. And you know those yellow things in the middle of the road, I didn't realize at the time that they were on swivels, because he drove right over those things. And so we followed him and drove right over them too. And you know, after a couple turns and winds around and stuff, he just kind of pulls over and just gives us and we're like, so we get off and we're like, okay, cool. Well, that at least got us to our correct exit, even though we still really didn't know where we were going. But we end up, I don't remember if we end up calling George at some point or how it happened, but we ended up getting there. And it was, I remember it was kind of late. It was midnight, 1 a.m. maybe, because, you know, it's a 7-8 hour drive from Ohio. And so we got there kind of late. And I remember George coming out to meet us, and I don't know if we had a trailer, but I'm pretty sure we had might have rented a minivan or something. And where are we at here? Third string. And so, you know, we pull in, and it was summertime, so, or at least warm enough, and there were lots of people out. We were just like, whoa, okay, this is different. And there was like high-rise apartment buildings, a bunch of them, and people were immediately coming up to us. And I remember George was just kind of like, you know, making sure we're all good. And we had a cooler, we had beer in, and one guy's like, hey man, let me get some of those beers, you know. And I don't think we gave any away, but I remember feeling kind of nervous that our stuff was going to be okay. But we went inside and we spent the night. And in the morning, Jeff and I were like, well, maybe we should go check on the van, make sure everything's all good. And I can't keep track of my stuff. And so we go down. Where did I put my other string? So we go down. There it is, I think. Yeah. So we go down to the van, and you know, we walk out, and you know, it's mid-morning or so, and so there's lots of people out and about. And I remember we definitely stood out like a sore thumb, because you know, you get two long-haired dudes dressed in all black walking through this area where nobody looked like us, that's for sure. But you know, everything was fine. We go down to the van, open up the van, everything's fine. I remember this same dude in a wheelchair that we saw when we got there that night was out there, like, he was trying to get some money out of us. He's like, hey man, I watched this for you guys last night so nobody hit this thing. And we were like, dude, you couldn't have done anything. He was in a wheelchair. He wasn't gonna protect our stuff, but he was, you know, he was trying to get something out of us. So we get in the van, everything's fine, everything's there, it hasn't been broken into or anything like that. And you know, it was our first time in that area, so we had no idea what was there. And so we lock up the van, we're like, well, let's just kind of, you know, we're thinking New York City, there's just stuff everywhere. So, you know, we just like, let's check it out. Well, we start walking, and within a block or two, we realized there was nothing to see. And so we just turned around and started walking back towards the van. And for whatever reason, you know, Jeff got in the van again. I think Jeff did. Getting something, forgot something, whatever it was. And so we get in the van again, and then close up the van, and we're just gonna go back inside. Well, right after we do that, there's a car coming down the opposite side of the street. So we're like walking this way, and there's a car coming this way. And next thing you know, this car just comes across the road to the opposite lane, zooms up on the curb, and we're just walking. We're like, the heck? All of a sudden these 3 dudes get out, and they were undercover cops. They were all in plain clothes, but they had the badges, around their neck, and walked right up to us. Hey, what are you guys doing? Like, just walking down the road. And what'd you get out of the van? We're like, nothing, you know, we're just from out of town, and, you know, we're checking our stuff. We're staying here, checking our stuff was good. And they're like, any drugs in the van? We're like, no. And there may or may not have been a little bit of weed, but we didn't mention that. And so we're like, no. And, you know, they were just kind of looking at us, and I think they could tell, you know, obviously we were not from the area, and that we were telling the truth. We weren't up to anything. But the one thing that I'll never forget was the last thing the cops said to us was, you know, you're taking your life into your own hands walking around out here. We were like, whoa. Like, we knew it probably wasn't the best area, but didn't realize it was that kind of area. So I remember feeling a little like, man, like kind of little pissed, like cops zooming up on us. I mean, like, we already drew attention to ourselves just for being different, but the cops zooming up on us really drew attention to us, because obviously everybody that lived in that area knew that the undercover cops, what the undercover cops' cars looked like and that stuff. And so when they zoomed up on us, you know, obviously everybody really took notice of us. And so, you know, I was a little bit like, damn, kind of upset about that. But then at the same time, you know, when he said that we were taking our lives into our own hands, I was like, okay, maybe this is just a little more serious than what we realized. But we went inside, and, you know, everything was fine after that. And we went to the show later, and like I said, it's kind of a blur who we played with that night, because we played there several, you know, we probably played there, I don't know, 4 or 5 times total. So, you know, I kind of get things mixed up. But it was a cool spot. It was a tiny little place in Queens. It was like a long, narrow bar. You know, you walked in, and my recollection is the bar was on the right, and you go all the way to the back where the stage was. And it was a very small, deep venue. But there, we played some really cool shows there, and I know there were a lot of cool shows there over the years, and I think that was almost like Dehumanized home bar kind of thing, because, you know, they could definitely draw there. It was their area, and they put on some good shows there. And I remember at that time, I was out there with my band Ton, and I remember our Plague album was released on United Guttural Records in '99, and then so this was probably 2000, because we re-released the album ourselves, pressed another 1,000 copies, and I was trying to put a distro together just to kind of try to make the money back, you know. So I'm not just selling our CDs, I was trading for other CDs to take to shows to sell, because at that point, you know, most things were mail order. It wasn't like you were getting on the internet and ordering things. I mean, I guess the internet was starting to come around, but it wasn't even close to what it is now. So I had traded CDs with, I remember Brian Baxter from the Bladed Records. He hooked me up with a lot of cool stuff on trade to help get me started. Relapse, I remember trading with Relapse. They were very cool. Traded me a bunch of stuff. So around that time, I was starting to get a little bit of a distro together and selling at shows. And I remember the Hot Item. I had a bunch of copies of Diabolic's Supreme Evil, which I still love that CD today. And I remember people were just buying that left and right. That was like the hot item. People were really digging that, but it probably hadn't been out all that long. But yeah, that was a kind of a crazy experience. I mean, not too crazy where anything really bad happened, but just when you have the undercover cops zoom up on you in Queens, New York, and tell you you're taking your own life in your life in your own hands just by walking around. It was kind of like, whoa, okay. Like, part of me didn't believe it, but then I'm like, well, it's probably true. And they would know better than I would, because that wasn't the area that I was from. So yeah, I'm gonna finish stringing this up and start doing some riffing.